right, so it's 12:33 on my clock over here on my computer. So wait 2 more minutes to just read stuff from the chat. So back to, I remember who was it that was talking about working on their third book, Kendra. Yeah, so you learn so much from just writing your first novel and your second novel, and then sort of what happens between those two. Like some people need to rest a lot between working on two projects, and some people don't. They can jump right from one project to the next. And it's interesting when you do both the writing and the art, because then you can relate to the struggles of both visual artists and writers. So sometimes Matt and I will find that we have this problem when we're like, oh man, other visual artists don't seem to have this problem. Like we're looking at their profiles and their galleries and their followers, and it's like, yes, art block is a thing as well. But then we realize, oh wait, we're also writing a story with our pictures, and so this is a writer problem actually. And if you go onto a writer like page, you're like, oh yeah, I get this. This is a writer problem. We're currently having writer's block. All right, I'm going to start now. It is 12:35. That means we've had 5 minutes for people to come into the room. So I'm guessing that most of you don't know who I am. There might be a couple of you who already know me and my work. So I'm going to do an introduction, a brief introduction for people who have no idea who I am, but are just here on the title of the panel alone. So my name is Achiru, and I've been in the webcomic space for 2 decades now. I started making my first website in 2002. Which is a long time ago, back when GeoCities was a thing, and you could build your own website on that, and you could have rainbow colors and like little like colorful links and like things, glittery things falling down the screen, and all kinds of weird stuff that we can do with emojis now. It's old, right? Oh yeah, I started a really long time ago doing fan art of Digimon and Pokemon, and then I moved on to my biggest fandom was Yu-Gi-Oh! There was so much shipping in Yu-Gi-Oh! And then and we're gonna move on from Yu-Gi-Oh! Like I was a big fan of Slayers as well. Matt and I bonded over Slayers, and so we're very inspired by that work. Classic 90s anime. We are very classic 90s. We still listen to 90s J-pop in the background. We like new stuff too, but I think there's a period where you are young, right? In your teens, as a child, you absorb so much content. You're busy consuming content because you're trying to figure out your likes and your dislikes and what genre speaks to you, right? And then once you've kind of done that, sort of around late teens, 20s, maybe even 30s for some people, they start to want to create stuff, like create fan fiction, create fan art, and they start to move into the creative space of not just being a consumer, but also being a creator. So that leads us to step number 1. I call it, call yourself a creator and tell everyone. So this is difficult because as a kid, I remember wanting to be invisible, because I thought that would keep me safe. And it did. Like it did keep me safe from bullies. Matt had the opposite experience as a kid, where he wanted to be loud and then got in trouble a lot. But you know, everyone has their own experience, and society puts these pressures on us, right? And so I remember, at least in my household, Asian household, it wasn't really, my parents weren't overtly like, don't be an artist, you'll be broke. They were more like passive aggressive about it. So they're like, you need a backup plan. You should go to university. You should pick a profession and like have your art as a hobby. If it takes off, it takes off. If it doesn't, at least you have this safe backup plan. And so I went and did that. And so for a long time, my first full-time job was teaching elementary. So I identified for a while as a teacher. And I would tell people I'm a teacher, and all the conversations we have were sort of teacher related, and all my friends were teachers. And Matt had a similar experience. So he went to work for Indefinite Arts Society. So it is instructing people with disabilities to make art. And his whole family was happy for him. Like, yay, you found something in the art field, like in the art department. Like, isn't that your dream job? And it's really hard because you have to be true to yourself and say, no, this is not my dream job. Like, I don't want to talk about this. But in order to change the conversation around you, in order to change the conversation around your community, the people who love you, your friends, your cousins, like all of that, you have to start telling people that you're a creator and what you actually want to do with your life, if that's what you actually want to do with your life. If you want it to be a hobby, then you can stick with, friends, communities where you all share that hobby, right? So you want to find places where you feel seen and you feel heard. So for me, because I wanted to start taking it professionally, I went to take business classes because I'm like, I suck at business. I clearly need education. So I spent a lot of money there, but I have to say, it is a very surreal experience to walk into a room full of entrepreneurs, like business coaches, people doing like selling insurance, people selling like fitness classes, and stand up in front of a room of like 100 of those people and just say like, you know what I do? I illustrate queer intimacy. And everyone goes silent because like we haven't heard anybody do that before. So it's about slowly starting to figure out, okay, what do I want to call myself and what do I want to be known for? And that's how I'm going to lead in small talk, in conversations with other people. So when Matt was upset that everyone thought he wanted to be a painter because he was really good at like acrylic landscape paintings, and so that's what he was known for. And people would ask him to do landscape paintings or ask them to paint their dogs. And he was slowly starting to feel like, this isn't me. Like, why are people asking me to do this? But he realized that he didn't give people an actual window into what he actually wanted, which was, drawing in a cartoonish style, drawing comics. And so once he made that shift and started telling people, hey, this is what I'm about, check out my Instagram gallery. Like, I am a freelance artist, freelance cartoonist. And he started using those words, it became real, right? You make that your reality. So that's step one. All right, so step two, if you guys want to take notes, step two is know your good enough bar. So a lot of us get trapped in wanting something to be perfect. We want the thing that we imagined in our mind to come out perfectly onto the page or the canvas. And that's not how it starts. That's not how it ever starts. And so even like when I was learning how to draw realism, things look weird and disjointed and shaky. So at some point, you have to look at, hey, I did my best. This is as far as I can push it at my skill level at this time. Like, I've hit my good enough bar. I'm going to call this piece done, this piece of art or this piece of poetry or this piece of writing or this video, right? I'm going to call it done and I'm going to move on. And if you have a good enough bar, then that allows you to keep creating. So creating a body of evidence, and you don't get stuck on the one thing didn't go right and then using that as evidence to, I can never ever do better, couldn't achieve the thing I had in my mind, and so I'm just gonna abandon it and tell myself that I'm not worthy of being able to do that, right? I can't work up to it. So I remember when I was in school that there was back in the early 90s, right? Early 90s in Canada, there were no comic classes. There wasn't even comics in the library yet. You wouldn't, the manga section at Chapters was like this big. It was really tiny. So there really weren't a lot of opportunities. So I knew that I had to create those opportunities. And so what I did was I asked my teachers for every assignment that I possibly could. I asked my teachers, can I make this a comic assignment? Like, can I turn this essay and take this essay that you wanted me to write, but can I turn it into a comic instead and hand that in, right? Right, and Matt says that he did that too. Like, so you have to make your own opportunities to practice your craft. And so I remember being so proud that the first comic I ever completed, because most of my fan comics all just sort of got abandoned. I never actually finished those stories. But the first one I did finish was a complete retelling of Shakespeare's Macbeth, because we were studying Shakespeare's Macbeth in grade 10. I remember hitting that last page and being like, this is page 277. I've never reached that page count before. Like, this is amazing. I can finally say that I can write like a long running manga novel. Like, it was all in pencil. It wasn't professional in any way. So it was pencil sketches at the time. I'm like, I did it. I got to 277 pages and I can call it done. But yeah, so that was my good enough bar. It wasn't good enough to submit anywhere. Like, I tried and to take it to conventions and show people as like a portfolio piece, but people turned it down because it was legitimately not clean, not professional looking, and sketchy. But the most important thing is it an accomplishment to yourself, right? If it's an accomplishment to yourself, that means you've grown as a person. And that's actually just an inkling. That's just a little preview of who you could be. So I took that and just kept moving on. So that leads us to step number 3, which is to stay in the game. So a lot of people, like, this is a good metaphor, right? So some people love a sport, like they love hockey. We live in Canada. So people love hockey and they buy tickets to hockey and they watch hockey. And a lot of them had dreams of being a hockey player, but, you know, life got in the way. And so they just sort of made do with being a spectator. And I want people to be aware of when you start to step into the sidelines and become a spectator to your own life. Because I don't think that's where you're like the highest version of you is, right? Sitting in the seats, not even the front seats, like the back seats in the stadium, right? To be really great, or to achieve like your personal best, the most excellent version of you, you've got to be in the game, even though you're losing the game, right? The athletes, they go in there, they play, and sometimes they lose, or sometimes they get hurt, they go to the hospital, they train again, they come back next year, right? You got to be like, okay, am I a spectator right now? Is that where I am in my life? And I was, right? Back when I was teaching full time, I was teaching like after school, like what is it called? Extracurricular classes as well. So I was teaching on the weekends. I had like 72 kids I was teaching at one point, because I was teaching 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, and then I was also teaching Saturday. And the only day I had off was Sunday. And it was insane. I felt really burned out by the end of it. And when I was burned out, like, I would go to work, I would force myself out of bed, go to work, and work would take me from 7 till 7, because you have to, after the kids are gone, you still have to clean up and plan for the next day and go to meetings with other teachers. But I go from 7 to 7. And as soon as I got home, like, thankfully I still had my parents at the time. So my mom made dinner. I would come home, eat dinner, and just crash. I would just like fall asleep, dead asleep in my bed, and then have to force myself up the next day. And over the course of an entire year, I remember feeling really suicidal, actually, by June, by the end of that first teaching year. And I realized that this is not sustainable. I cannot have this full-time job because there was absolutely no way I could keep this job and do what, my soul really wanted. I couldn't work on my art. There was no time to work on my art at all while I was doing this, right? You sort of started to become a spectator in your own life. And so I remember when I got the contract for renewing for another year, I quit. I had a year's worth of savings in my savings account. I decided I'm going to go become an artist. I don't know how. I have a little bit of money, but so I started with taking commissions for a year. And then I realized, you know what, while I'm doing commissions, I don't have time to write my graphic novel series, right? So it was you got to weigh the decisions again. So I can either do this and then have no time for this, but what I really want to do is this. So then I had to stop putting myself out there as open for commissions. So again, it's a slow adjustment of being like, okay, what game do I want to play and how do I stay in it, right? And make those sacrifices as necessary and as able. But you do have to enjoy the journey too. Yeah. So step number 4 is put your ego in the back seat of the car. So imagine you're driving a car, and every once in a while, when you're tired, when you have overextended yourself, ego loves to come in when your willpower is low. And ego is the fear programming that every human being has that really is just there to keep you safe. But it likes to tell you that you're not good enough, you'll never get anywhere with what you're doing, and always take the absolute safest possible option, even though the safest possible option is usually also the most miserable option. And it's busy, like anything new that you've never done before, it thinks is scary, scary, scary. And it's like a kid throwing a tantrum. And you have to remember, like, don't let a 4-year-old drive. That is a recipe for disaster, right? So ego is usually very loud, right? Always wants his way. You can see this, like sometimes when I watch Donald Trump, I'm like, he's letting his ego run the show. Like it's the personality aspect of you that I want to look good, I want to look amazing, everyone should praise me, but it hasn't done anything to deserve that, right? And so you have to remember that you are the parent in this situation, and you have this unruly, like 4-year-old personality inside of you. You got to put it in the back seat, and you can let it cry. You're like, I hear you cry, I hear you yelling, I hear you screaming, but you know what, you're not driving. We're not, just because you said so doesn't mean that's what we're going to do. So here's an example, a story that illustrates this. So I remember Matt came to me really upset about how his art wasn't improving. And he was always asking the question, how can I be a better artist, right? What can I do? What's wrong with my, art? And notice that every time you use the word I or my, like those, what's it called? They are pronouns, but there's a certain subset of pronouns. I don't know. But anyway, every time you ask a question with I in it, that's ego talking. And so I told him, stop asking those questions. If there's an I in it, stop asking them. That's taking you off course, right? That's taking you off the game. Instead, look at it from serving, right? How can I serve this novel that I'm working on? How can I serve this poem? How can I serve this piece of art? How can I serve the idea, right? And the art will tell you what it wants, right? If it wants you to go research, the Mayans, then you go do that. It will tell you, oh, the proportions doesn't look right, so go look at a tutorial on how to fix that. Let the comic guide you. Let the art tell you what you need to do. Take the I out of there. It's not about you. It's about the piece that you're making and what that piece needs, right? So that's a tip on how to figure out what is ego versus what isn't ego.
Your story is more alive than you
Yeah,
think.
your art is more alive than what you think it is. And so if you are serving your art, then you're not working from ego, and you'll be surprised at where your art will take you, right? Because it's you or its project. You are becoming somebody worthy of creating and channeling really interesting things. All right, so that leads us to step number 5, which is to respect your own lived experience. And this is something that my mother drilled into me, because at the time I was struggling with writing my own original content. So if it was based off a story, like if I was doing like a version of Rapunzel, if I was doing like a version of this story that already exists, then it was great because I already had the outline, the story was already written, I was just giving it my own spin. But she said that, you know what, your life is interesting. Like, if you write from what you know, nobody else will be able to, like, it's not an inbred idea, right? If people are just copying from other creators over and over and over again, I think you see this a lot in modern anime, that some things become tropes, is because that idea has been inbred. Like, someone did it, somebody else copied it, and then someone else copied the copy of the copy, and then eventually you have this super inbred idea that you can trace the origins of, but it's no longer original. And life is always throwing original stuff at you. Like, your lived experience, nobody else has. The struggles that you've been through, the parents that you had, the weird things you've encountered, nobody else has. And that's your superpower, is your own lived experience. So if you can draw from what has happened to you or the personalities that are around you, then that sort of gives your whatever you're working on more originality, more flavor, more uniqueness, I guess. And it just feels real. It feels deeper. Like, oh, so let's see. Like, I wanted to give an example of how I've respected my own lived experience. And I think the most prominent example that comes to mind at this moment is these two characters here. I have see. So this is Shay and this is Vera. And a lot of Shay's personality was actually based off my mom. I believe that she might have been undiagnosed ADHD. I find that I meet a lot of people in my friend circle who have ADHD. Like my ex-girlfriend had ADHD. My husband right now has ADHD, and another one of my close friends also has ADHD. My photographer who took the pictures of our wedding also has ADHD. But it's just the mannerisms of like time blindness and like talking really fast about a special interest and all of those things. Like I took that and I put it into Shay. And then when one person is a little bit of a disaster in a couple, usually the other person has to be the anti-disaster. So naturally, because of my relationship with my mom, she's trained me into being like a caretaker kind of person, right? So if someone needs an ear to listen to, right, then I can be that rock. I can be there and just listen. I can offer suggestions if they want suggestions, right? And I can also help because I understand that it's something outside their control. It's like a neurological condition, like your brain can't help it. So it sucks, right? It sucks when your brain makes you do things you don't want to do, makes you mess up all the time, like makes you trip because you're it makes you klutzy. And usually people with this condition will beat themselves up over it, right? They're like, why am I making more mistakes than everybody else? Like, I'm done with this. Like, I hate my brain, right? And then you just have to be there, be like, yo, look, you know what? I love you. I love your brain. It's okay. Like, we all make errors. It's okay if you make more errors than average. Like, it's taking that experience that I've had and then putting that in my story. And then other people who have had sort of similar experiences be like, oh, I see myself in that character. That is really cool, right? I've never seen somebody like that reflects so much of me, or I like that personality. And I'm going to use that as inspiration for my own OCs, right? I've had that happen. So that's step 5. And we're going to move on to step 6, which is to trust in your own timeline. So part of my relationship with my mom involved her having cancer. So my mom had cancer for 12 years, and that's a long time to be fighting an illness. And I watched her sort of get over her first round of chemo and drugs, and then she didn't really believe the medical community could cure her, because at the time, it was just something you could manage, but you couldn't be cured. And so she went on this hunt for a cure. She tried everything, right? I followed her to chiropractic. I followed her to meditation workshops. I followed her to all kinds of different things, cleansing, all things that she tried to do to heal herself. And I learned a lot, from attending all of those things with her and being her support. And at the same time, I was a little resentful because I was like, okay, this is not my dream. My dream is not to be a caretaker, right? But I'm kind of forced into this situation because this is my family, right? So yeah, I wanted to be able to pursue, because I was young, like I was 17, like I wanted to go pursue what I wanted to do for a career. I wanted to go, be famous young, because everybody wants to be famous while they're young, right? I wanted to go make the thing I wanted, I wanted to make my novels, but I couldn't make my novels while I was being like the primary caretaker for my mom, right? And so I think when I didn't appreciate it until she passed away. And when she passed away, I realized I don't actually regret all that time that I spent with her and not abandoning her and working on my own art, right? um I don't regret that. That was lived experience that I will take with me and share it through my art, right? And so sometimes when you look at another artist and they look like they're more popular, and maybe they've have more books published. I remember I was comparing myself to Shilin. Some of you, or Oklenor, I don't know what her other screen name is, but she's works on Blackbird, which was the old title. The new title is Carsophona. But anyway, she's the creator of Carsophona, and she's also Canadian, lives in Toronto, and I remember being a really big fan of her work because she does really detailed art, and I don't have the mental capacity to do that much detail. Like my stuff is very simple, but each their own. But I was admiring her stuff and I was kind of noticed that there was a little bit of jealousy growing, right? I'm like, oh man, she's already got 5 books out and I have 0 books, right? We're about the same age. She's only a year older. How is it that she seems so much more successful, right? But 10 years later, she's now releasing her 7th book, and I just finished funding like my 12th book, and like 13 if you add the art book. But yeah, it's difficult because you're comparing like chapter 1 of your journey to like chapter 17 of somebody else's story. Like everyone goes through something different. Like I was dealing with like family stuff. I was dealing with like my mom had cancer, my dad had a heart attack. Like I was dealing with all this stuff in the background, and before that my grandfather had colon cancer. There was always somebody sick, and I always had to drive somebody to the hospital. So like that was happening in the background. So you just got to forgive yourself for whatever is going on in the background of your own life. And somebody else might not have that. That's not their season. um Astrology likes to call it the cycle of Saturn, because Saturn is the planet of death and destruction and rebirth. So everyone goes through a different season. Like, so you might be in a season of rest and recovery and recuperation, while somebody else is in their season of growth, right? They look like they're conquering the world, while you look like you're lying in bed depressed. But in like 2 years, that could flip. Maybe something happens to them. They lose a significant other, or something happens in their family, somebody has dementia, and then all of a sudden you're in your cycle of growth. So it swaps, right? So you just got to be aware of not comparing your journey to somebody else's journey. All right, so that was step 6, trusting in your own timeline. So I was just reading the comments. Sarah says, this is why I love following people who are creating near my level on Twitter. There are different ways to be inspired. There's the place I could be in 15 years versus the place I could be tomorrow. And the place I could be tomorrow is more directly helpful to your journey at the moment. And I really like that. That's a really good way to look at it. So that leads us to number 7. Number 7 I got from a speaker called Mark Manson, and also through a writer named Liz Gilbert, who did Live, Eat, Pray, Love. So I'm going to say Live, Laugh, Love. I'm like, that is not the title of the book. But it's called Choose Your Flavor of Shit Sandwich. Right? I don't know if you've heard them talk about the concept of shit sandwich, but it's the idea that anything anybody does, like any sandwich that anybody eats, any career you take, any choice you make, there's shit in the middle of it. And you get to choose what flavor of shit that you want to eat. So for example, if you're going to have a baby, it's going to cry. You're going to have to change diapers. Like that just comes with having a baby. Like if you have a pet, if you have a dog or a cat, you're going to have to, pick up its poop and like other things like that, right? Everything comes with downsides, basically, right? So if you're going to choose to be a chef, you might have to deal with, angry, entitled customers who say they're gluten-free but are not gluten-free. Like there's things that come with any job that are shit, basically. And when Liz was talking about being a writer, part of being a writer is being ignored for a very long period of time, being an unknown author for a very, very long period of time. And sometimes that our artists and writers and musicians, like we take our art to the grave sometimes. That has happened before in history. And it's like I don't want to believe that it's part of the territory, but the reality is that comes with the territory, right? That's the shit sandwich. Like, so if I'm going to do this work, I have to be able to stomach that I'm going to have to eat this kind of shit along with this kind of work. So the question isn't what do I love the most? It's also what do I love so much that I don't mind the shit that comes with it, right? I can eat the whole sandwich without like throwing up and like leaving or giving it to somebody else. So I remember one creator I was following, I don't remember his name off the top of my head. I think he did the like a astronaut boy series on webtoons, but he also did a very, you can find it on his website, it's called Brick by Brick. So it's the idea that you can't control, whether you go viral, whether you have like a big platform or not, but you can control the quality of your work, like how talented and how skilled you are, to the point where you're so good that you can't be ignored. You can control that, right? Um, and so it's looking at, if you want to build a wall, you have to start with just one brick at a time, right? That does connect to my last step, but step 7 is you've got to evaluate, am I willing to put up with very uncomfortable parts of the journey, right? And to recognize that even if you decided to change course, even you're like, I can't put up with this anymore, and then you look at somebody else's shit sandwich. Like I look at people who are stuck in corporate jobs, for example, who every day they wake up and they hate their lives and they hate their work. And you're like, you know what, that could have been a sandwich I could have chosen to eat, but I'm really glad that is not the sandwich I chose to eat. Like, I'm really glad I don't wake up every day hating my job. That is one thing that I don't have to deal with, but that they have to deal with because they're doing it for either the money or to look good in the eyes of their community or their parent. They have reasons for doing the job that they do, and even if it makes them miserable, usually they have a health crisis by the time they're 50 and then all the money they made ends up going into their health. But we all have to struggle with what are we willing to accept in terms of contrast, right? We've got sunny days and rainy days. What kind of rainy days are we willing to put up with for the sunny days? Which leads us to step number 8. Step number 8, I called it serve the audience that you've got. Even if that audience is just your sister. That's how I started. I had a little sister, and everything I made, I showed it to her, and I would get her critique of it. And then slowly that expanded. Like, I did show my parents, but my parents were not as interested in anime. So I started to show my friends, right? And then I got into, back in the day, DeviantArt. If anyone remembers DeviantArt. Actually, before DeviantArt, there was Oikaki boards. I think some people are still on like Tagaki digital paint boards. So I was on that community for a while, and then I noticed all of my friends were migrating to DeviantArt. So then I migrated to DeviantArt, and then all of everyone started migrating to Instagram. So I started moving everything to Instagram because social media started happening. We didn't have that in the early 90s, but continue to serve the audience you've got. I remember being really heartbroken when my health gave out when I was 17. I didn't know that there was such a thing as drawing too much, but I developed a repetitive strain in my left arm. So it would hurt to draw. It would hurt to use chopsticks because this is my dominant hand. And it kind of moved from just my arm to my shoulders and my neck and my body. So it kind of slowly evolved into this chronic fatigue, fibro, where by the time I graduated my first year of university, I was bedridden for like 2 years. I mean, I could get up. It felt like concrete. Like it felt like a truck rolled over me, but I would like, I would like lie in bed and be like, get up, Come on, get up. You need to use the bathroom. Come on, you can get up. You can at least pee, right? So the only time that I would get up was to use the bathroom and to eat, and then I'll go back to bed. And like slowly, I was able to figure out and take apart what was the physical um, symptoms versus the mental and emotional symptoms. So I realized that I was actually making my condition way worse than it had to be, because I was also beating myself up over like, you're 21, you're 22, like you should be in the prime of your life. You should be going off and, doing all the amazing things that other people are doing at this age. And that wasn't helping. It wasn't helping my reality. It wasn't helping me feel better about myself. And eventually I realized that I have to work within my limits, and actually my health was protecting me from overdoing it, right? So if I think of like two channels, like one is my body and one is my mind, I don't want them too far apart from each other, where my mind is over here and my body is off doing its own thing, not listening to me, blah 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 blah. I have to kind of figure out a way to have them on the same wavelength so that we can work together, right? And so I remember being so disappointed when my health crashed, because that was back when I was updating on DeviantArt and I had a really good following and people were leaving comments on every page that I was uploading. And all of a sudden that came to a halt, right? I physically could not keep up with that schedule while working, while doing my degree. And then after I recovered, right after I really focused on recovery and I even let go of identifying as an artist, I started to realize in that space that I couldn't draw, that I couldn't call myself an artist, right? Because I wasn't drawing, but I was more than that, right? I started to expand my sense of identity. I was like, okay, I'm not just an artist. Clearly, I'm also a daughter, also a friend. I'm also like a mentor. Like I'm also all these other things. It was easier to like write because drawing takes more effort than writing actually. So I started to experiment with poetry and just writing, and I actually made a fan fiction account, started writing fanfiction. So I just started to notice that maybe I don't need to identify as just one thing, right? Maybe it's okay to be multiple things. And that was like, okay, now I'm just this space, a space where anything is possible. I could be anything. I could be a chef, right? I could be a poet. I'm just going to leave that open. I'm not going to box myself in and like, I have to be an artist. I'm going to make this happen. And so even though technically I lost my audience that I built up when I got ill, when I relaunched later, when I relaunched on Webtoons, I like doubled that audience. And so now I have the concrete evidence that you can take time off, you can take years off, and you can come back stronger. Like that is possible, right? And so now I have that lived experience behind me. And so that leads us to step number 9, which is change your emotional state first. A lot of people operate their lives on the belief that when this happens, I'll be happy. Like when I have the money, I'll be able to travel. Or when I have, the attention, then I'll be happy. Like when I have this many followers, I'll be happy. When this happens, I'll be happy. When I have this figurine that I really, really want, then I'll be happy. When I have this outfit that I really, really want, I'll be happy. But that's not how life actually works. The way reality actually works is when I'm happy, things happen. Like weird, magical stuff happens. Like when you're in a good mood, everything else follows. Like when you're happy, your essays just magically get written on time. Like when you're happy, people magically just, you get a free cup of coffee. Weird things happen, like you get gifts. And so the trick is to be aware of when you're stuck in the when this happens, I'll be happy, and turn it around to, okay, clearly I'm not getting it because I'm stuck in this negative state of mind, right? So you need your toolbox to fill your toolbox with what are things that can make me happy right now. And one of those things for me is taking a hot bath. It changes my mood instantly, right? Or having a piece of candy. Like I have chocolate in the fridge. Like if I need to change my mood, uh, body language helps as well. If you sit up straighter, you feel better. So sometimes it's just posing in the mirror, right? Doing a power pose and having a nice cup of tea that or something soothing, just an immediate fix to your mood. And if you shift your state, you'll be able to create the results that you wish you had but weren't getting. So, and then that leads us to my last step, which is to build a body of evidence. And so now I can sit here with the big shelf behind me being like, I did all this stuff. This didn't exist before, but I made it exist, and that's because the mind is trained to only believe things that happened in the past. Your mind can't believe in the things that don't exist yet. And so if you haven't drawn anything yet, then your mind goes, you're clearly not an artist, right? But if you've drawn something, then you can prove it to your mind. You can put it in your face and be like, yeah, I did this. Does this convincing enough, ego? Right? And so it doesn't need to be perfect. So it's building a body of like imperfect but done things that you can call complete, a body of like completed things. And eventually that's going to attract attention. Eventually people will be like, oh, what's that mountain of stuff over there? Right? I'm curious. And so it's about building evidence for yourself to believe in the journey that you want to head on. And I'm just going to read out. Sarah says to everyone, yeah, the list of self-soothing strategies feels silly to write, but it's so helpful when you need it. I want to make separate lists of calm and quiet soothing activities, aka sipping herbal tea, and get all this negative energy out. Or soothing activities, also singing along to angry music. Explorer Vanda says, I put prints on my wall for this very reason. And Veronica Purcell says, that's my strategy. I'm aiming to be prolific of quality of works. And something else I wanted to bring up in terms of creating a body of evidence, I also want to talk a little bit about genre, I guess, and medium. So back to what was the step about comparing? Yes, number 6, about your own timeline. So in the world of webcomics, in the world of comics in general, you have 2 very different types of comics. One that you could actually call novels, like graphic novels, and one that are more like newspaper strips, like Sarah Scribbles. Like I'm a big fan of Sarah Scribbles. I'm a big fan of a lot of like 4-panel comics, really simple comics, black and white comics. But the trajectory of comics that are simple means that they're easy to put out there. You can put out a larger quantity of them faster if you keep your art style simple, right? But for someone who's creating something like what Shilin is doing, if you're creating like a fantasy or a sci-fi, it's you kind of have to flesh out the world, and part of fleshing out the visuals of the world is it takes more work to flesh out those visuals, right? So you have to figure out, am I a sprinter or a marathon runner sometimes when it comes to your choice of projects? And if you're a marathon runner, there's no point in looking at the sprinter and being jealous of how many sprints they are able to do in a shorter amount of time. And to give yourself the grace to be like, I am running a really long marathon and I am training really, really hard to do just this one run. And that's okay. Right. So I remember talking to a lot of other comic creators on a platform called Comics Launch. So you can write that down if you're interested. Comics Launch is a community of people that are launching things on Kickstarter. It's basically it is a paid program, but they teach you how to, figure out, calculate your numbers, build an email list, and how to launch successfully and raise funds on Kickstarter. And there's so many different projects launching on Kickstarter. And most people in business will talk about how you have to create, you have to, I don't know, what is it called? You have to create a pattern, right, in customers to have them consistently buy from you. And so most people in the comics launch community are launching something every year or launching something every couple of months, right? They keep their issues really short. It's almost like a zine, right? uh, and they are able to build an audience doing that. At the same time, though, that's not what calls to me, right? Again, this is my own timeline. I find that I want to work on something really substantial and really deep, and I can't put out a book a year. I mean, I could, but I don't think that it would be at the quality that I want to release it at. So what I'm learning about myself, because my last launch failed, I'm learning that, you know what, I feel like my speed is launching something every 4 years. And I have to make peace with that. Right. It's gonna take me longer, but I'm going to have fun and enjoy my life while I'm doing it. And one of the reasons why it takes so long is that when I'm channeling a story, it's not necessarily in chronological order. I don't know if anybody else is dealing with that type of issue as a writer, but sometimes you can't write perfectly chronologically. You can't go chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. Sometimes you need to write chapter 15 to figure out a little piece of information that you'll need in chapter 5. Sometimes you have to go forward a little bit before you go backwards, and then piece everything together. um yeah, Veronica Perosa, yeah, it takes 3 years for a series. And I'm noticing that a lot of people who are interested in long form stories that span series, uh it is challenging. You're going to feel invisible for a very 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 long time. But I think, if for me at least, I really enjoy creating something that I wish existed. Like, I'm almost, so for example, I really love the Owl House. I don't know anybody Owl House fans out there. Like, I really enjoy the story there, but I think that you have to be your own fan. Your first number one fan has to be you to yourself, and you have to really love these characters, even if there is not an existing fandom to share your love with, right? But I have that now on my Patreon. I have people who really know my characters as if we were all best friends, because we know so many details about their lives, because we've been following their lives for feels like years. I started publishing the Man and Lucky channel in 2017. So 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. It's been 6 years that I've known these guys. And so they feel like my friends, right? On the back of my hand. And I'll talk about them as if they were my friends. So I think the joy of just doing it, even if no one else is watching, I love seeing them hit milestones. Right now I'm planning a wedding, their wedding, actually they're getting married first. So yeah, that's exciting. I'm like, I've been waiting 6 years for you guys to finally get here. And so this is a milestone, right? And we're gonna celebrate it together, just me and myself in my head. And I guess on the canvas that I'm drawing on. And for people who want to come along for the ride on Instagram, because that's free, then yeah, you're welcome to watch what's happening there. If you don't know, my Instagram is at Achiru, Achiru, period dot et period dot al. So et al is Latin for and others, and I like to use that mostly because, like, there is an academic nerd in me that wishes that I was a professor writing papers. But I like to think of my characters as people that I'm collaborating with, right? These are the ideas that I I don't own them. I don't dictate them. I don't want to, but they're my friends, and I want to share my friendship with them with you. Right? That's all I think of it as, that they're my collaborators, right? And we recreate this piece of art together. All right, there's not a lot of time left for questions, but if you have any last minute questions, please put them down in the chat and we will discuss that. What did you guys learn? Did you take some good notes? Oh, we got a new message. Ska says it was very reassuring. And Laura says she's finishing up notes now. Mike asks, do you write your script first or do you draw first? So here's the interesting thing about the artistic process is that changes as you keep growing. So in the beginning, I used to draw first. I used to do thumbnails, right? And then I would kind of draw right with the drawings. But now I have this thing where I just record the dialogue. So I have Notepad on my phone and I just write down what the characters are saying to each other. And so I have the script in just dialogue. And then when I go to draw it, sometimes that script changes because in the drawing process, that's where I figure out where this character is standing. Are they sitting in a chair? Are they handing someone a glass of water? Are they eating a sandwich? And sometimes in figuring out the specifics of what environment that they're in as they're talking, sometimes the script changes a little bit, but the original script is always there for me to remember, like I need to hit this point in their dialogue because that is, you know, an important part of the plot, right? So I have to have hit this point in the dialogue and hit this point in the dialogue. And it's okay if some of the things shift in the middle as they're talking and as I'm drawing it out.
Can I interject?
Oh,
you want to
Matt, go ahead, Matt. Come in.
Hi.
Matt wants to add to this because he's writing a story
Hello,
too.
it's me again.
Yes.
No, I just wanted to say I in working with my comic, yeah, like I used to struggle a lot with scripts because I started as an artist first and gradually worked up to being a writer. But yeah, so basically I started out with my graphic novel with doing thumbnails actually.
Yeah.
I have a very difficult time writing beginnings or just starting out any scene.
Because it's visual, right? You see it.
Especially with comics,
and your brain hates having to put things in description. Like you don't want to say, oh, his hair was brown, he was wearing a white t-shirt. Like you don't want to do that because that's
exactly
right. But because you're visual, right? Because you're like, I need to draw this, right? I'm not going to write out the description.
Yeah, it's hard. Or writing any scene can be hard at first, especially if you're not used to writing. So I guess you could say I sort of storyboarded the scene, and when that got fleshed out, it's like the dialogue just kind of formed from drawing the characters out.
Yeah.
I hope that makes sense. But as time went on, I found for me, I switched and started gradually writing scripts before I did the thumbnails. Because one of the problems with drawing it out first is you have this speech in mind.
It doesn't fit the speech bubble.
It doesn't fit the speech bubble or even the panel.
Like
or it
you left space for the speech, but then you didn't realize what they were going to say.
Yeah, you get used to that very quick though. So I think for me, the best advice I could give is just do what feels natural. If writing comes more naturally, then do that.
Yeah.
If like drawing
do
it
what
out
feels light to you first.
Yes,
like,
that's a great way to put it.
Does this feel light to me or does this feel heavy to me? And always go with the decision that feels lighter. Like both of us, when we started our stories, we used to restart a lot. Like like this story that I was writing on, this Unspoken, I restarted it 20 times before I lost count. I actually have notebooks which say like version 1, version 2, version 17. And at some point I'm like, I have to stop. I can't just keep making new beginnings of this story. I have to just commit to one telling, no matter how bad it might be when I look back at it, and just keep moving forward with it.
100%.
Like just commit to like, this is the version. We are going to turn back. And if there's plot holes, oh well, I'll figure out how to fill them as I go.
How many times do I tell you, you know, this plot's not sticking, maybe I should start all over, but you won't let me.
I won't
She
let
won't
him.
let me. I won't
let him fall back into that trap of restarting over and over and over.
Yeah, I'm in jail basically.
Yeah,
Where
it
I'm like
feels
I'm locked into this, and I can't come out until I finish it.
Yeah, I'm like, you'll the story will tell you how to fix the plot hole. Give it time. Go ride a bike, go do something else while you're in that block, like the writer's block or the artist block.
Oh yeah.
Do something else entirely, and the story will solve itself. And you'll come back and be like, oh yeah, I know what to do now. Because the thing is, like, your brain can't process ideas when you're stressed or tired, right? Hungry, stressed, or tired. And so as soon as you can get out of those states, if you can find a way to relax yourself or feed yourself, right, the idea will come back. It will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But and that's the thing, right? Like, I think, like we were saying earlier, the story, it's sort of creepy in a way how characters in your story almost become alive.
You want them to feel alive.
Like, they will suddenly pop in your head and say,
they will
okay,
tell you what to do.
Exactly. You almost don't have to. You're the
channeler, the medium.
You're the translator. You're tapping. This is going to sound really psychedelic, but you're tapping into another world basically, and the characters,
like another dimension.
Yeah, they're telling you all of this. They've already. Yeah,
it's all, the story already exists in its entirety. It already exists. You're just pulling pieces. The story into is our reality, and then trying to put it together here so that you can share it in this 3D reality, because not everyone can tap into that specific dimension where your story exists. Yeah.
And your story is smarter than you. That's what I've always learned, is like, you'd actually be surprised what you can come up with, because your story, I don't know, it's weird.
When you're not trying to control it, when you don't need it to be a certain way.
And I know that sounds weird, but trust me, when you actually start doing it for a long period of time, you will get that feeling. It will feel freaky.
It will feel freaky.
It's almost kind of ghostly in a way. Yeah. It's a little spooky.
Like, Elizabeth Gilbert talks about this in her book Big Magic. I highly recommend that book for anybody doing anything creative. So Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. She talks about like how instead of being a genius, people used to have a genius, like having a muse, like your genius was something outside of you, and you could go to work and be like, yeah, my genius didn't feel like showing up to work today, it's just me. Right? So, and then I think the last thing I want to say before we totally run out of time, probably already over time, is I wanted to talk a little bit about what was it? Step number. Where's the one where I talk about my own experience? Step 5.
Okay, I'll leave you to it then.
Okay.
Nice meeting everybody. Goodbye.
I'll wrap it up with this. Is respecting my own lived experience. So here's the other story. So I was talking about how Unspoken took a really long time, and that I had to go on hiatus because of my health, right? So I got to a point where my injury was hurting too much and I couldn't keep drawing on it. And I started to do spin-offs. So the Man at Lucky channel is a spin-off of Unspoken that I started creating. And it was really fascinating to me because it was directly a result of me having met Matt. Because when I was doing Unspoken, I hadn't met Matt yet. I met Matt in 2014. And so I put it out there in the universe. I'm like, okay, I want to write about a healthy romantic love, right? So I feel like if I'm a virgin, like if I have not actually experienced this, I don't feel qualified to write about it, right? So I have been in other relationships and they weren't the one, right? And I used all of that in channeling the Man and Lucky channel. But when I met Matt and then we got together and it felt like the right fit and we got married on a budget. And it was interesting how, having had that experience, then this spin-off idea happened where, so we finished The Myth of Eros and Psyche. That's what happened. So I finished my first book. We launched the first book. We were celebrating the launch of the first book when 2 of the characters from Unspoken that had never had any reason to talk to each other, I was doing portraits that day. I was like, I'm going to draw everybody in a realistic style just to test my skill. And then they met for the first time and fell in love from there and just kept talking and talking and talking. And I'm like, I need to record this. This is really fascinating. And what it was is the conversations that I had with Matt when I met him, a lot of it was about sex and intimacy because he was asexual and he had never done it with anybody before. And I was like, I have never been with somebody who has never done it with anyone before, and we had to navigate this. And so a lot of those conversations then inspired, I was able to talk to Man and Lucky, who had like a similar dynamic. And so we were basically being like, I talked about this. And he was like, yeah, we also talked about this. And that's kind of what spawned the spin-off series, which is really, and now we've met new characters, Kevin and Andrew, his ex-friends with benefits. I didn't know. I had no idea that they were going to become main characters. I thought they would have stayed side characters. So the fascinating thing about letting, just following an idea, right? Following your inspiration is it will lead you to places where you weren't expecting it to go, but it's a very pleasant surprise. So wasn't expecting to meet Kevin and Andrew. And now that we have met, now I realize that I needed to learn about these guys in order to go back to the original story that was on hiatus. Because one of the protagonists, he basically needed a drag mother, and I had no idea Andrew did drag until like 5 books in, because he didn't reveal that part of himself to me yet. But yeah, so everything kind of came full circle, and I'm like, oh, now I realize why we had to go on this detour. Now I have even more content to share, and this is great. So that's everything I think I wanted to share on this panel, and I hope you guys got a lot of insight out of it to use in your own creative journeys, right? So thanks for being out here. It was great, talking to all of you. And
where can we find you on the interwebs, if you want to share that?
Yeah, so my website is just achiru.com, so achiru.com. And again, you'll find my links to social media there. You'll find links to Amazon Kindle. So all of the ebooks, the digital books, are on Amazon Kindle. Softcover books are in my shop. But if you want to follow, I have mostly everything for free on Webtoons, the Man and Lucky channel on Webtoons, and also on my Instagram is kind of where I hang out the most. And then that's at achiru.et.el.
Well, thank you so much. And it was a wonderful panel.
Yeah. And I hope that if it is put on the internet, that it helps more people, more people chance across it. So another funny thing, I guess I could leave, is I actually have a little picture of 12-year-old me that I drew out chibi style, and I put it on the camera. So I've been talking to 12-year-old version of me. And you can hear my dog scratching the couch in the background. Biscuit, can you stop that, please?
Behave yourself, Biscuit.
You were so good for this entire hour. It's okay, we'll go for a walk later.